I am the villain of the story.
Lex Luthor wasn't born a villain. He was made. His descent into darkness was not a choice. It was a slow, tragic inevitability. But what if I told you that Smallville gave us the most realistic version of Lex Luthor ever seen? A man who could have been saved, but never was. Before Lex Luthor became the ruthless mastermind we know, he was just a kid, lonely, desperate, and constantly searching for love in all the wrong places. Smallville did an incredible job showing us that Lex wasn't born evil. His descent began early, shaped by trauma and heartbreak that would eventually harden him into the villain we feared, but also couldn't help but sympathize with. Let's start with Lex's relationship with his father, Lionel Luthor. This wasn't just tough love, it was psychological warfare. Lionel was cold, manipulative, and borderline abusive, constantly reminding Lex that he was never good enough. He belittled his achievements, questioned his worth, and poisoned Lex's mind with the idea that love is conditional and trust is dangerous. Imagine growing up under that constant pressure. It's no wonder Lex's view of the world became so warped. He learned early on that power was the only thing that could protect him from vulnerability. And then there's Lex's mother, Lillian Luthor. Her death left a gaping hole in Lex's heart. She was the only person who truly saw Lex's softer side, the part of him that wanted to be good, to love and be loved. Losing her at such a young age stripped away the emotional anchor that could have grounded him. Without her, Lex was adrift, left with a father who saw him more as a pawn than a son. Now add the meteor shower to the mix. Physically, Lex survived, but psychologically, it marked him forever. He lost his hair, was ostracized by the other kids, and became a walking reminder of the town's greatest tragedy. Lex wasn't just an outsider. He became the ultimate outsider, both in Smallville and within his own family. And here's where things get interesting. This trauma didn't turn him evil overnight. If anything, it made him crave connection even more. He longed for acceptance, for someone to truly see him beyond the scars. But every time Lex reached for connection, he was pushed further into isolation. Lionel's coldness, the town's mistrust, and the constant feeling of being other slowly chipped away at whatever innocence Lex had left. Psychologically, he began to associate vulnerability with pain and love with betrayal. These early experiences didn't just scar him, they shaped his entire worldview. So, was Lex destined to fall? Maybe. But Smallville makes it clear. Lex's early life planted the seeds of distrust, ambition, and desperation for control. Seeds that, over time, would grow into the complex, tragic figure we couldn't stop watching, even as we knew exactly where his story was heading. Now, let's talk about one of the most fascinating and heartbreaking parts of Lex's story: his friendship with Clark Kent. Honestly, this relationship is at the heart of Smallville. It's not just a subplot, it's the emotional core of Lex's journey. For Lex, Clark was more than a friend. He was hope. He was the symbol of the life Lex wished he could have had. When they first met, Lex wasn't trying to manipulate Clark. Far from it. In fact, their friendship started from a place of genuine admiration. Lex saw in Clark someone who was everything he himself had been denied. Loved, trusted, grounded in morality, and supported by a family that actually cared about him. Lex was drawn to that goodness like a moth to a flame. He wasn't just curious about Clark's secrets. He was inspired by Clark's ability to stay good in a world that had been so cruel to Lex himself. And for a while, it felt like Clark could actually be the anchor Lex desperately needed. Their early friendship shows us flashes of what Lex could have become if things had gone differently. Clark represented the path toward redemption. If Lex could keep this one true friend, maybe he could fight the darkness inside him. Maybe trust wasn't such a dangerous thing after all. But here's where the tragedy creeps in. While Lex admired Clark, he couldn't help but notice the walls Clark kept up. Clark's constant secrecy, especially about his powers and origins, fed into Lex's deepest insecurities. For a man already primed to expect betrayal, Clark's evasiveness felt like a confirmation of his worst fears. Why wouldn't Clark trust him? What was he hiding? This uncertainty gnawed at Lex, slowly eroding the foundation of their friendship. Over time, Lex's admiration turned into obsession. What started as a genuine desire to understand his friend twisted into something darker. Lex convinced himself that if he could just uncover the truth about Clark, everything would make sense. But in chasing that truth, he pushed Clark further away, feeding the very cycle of distrust that he so desperately wanted to avoid. What makes this even more powerful is the sense of inevitability. Smallville brilliantly foreshadows their eventual downfall by planting subtle cracks in their relationship early on. Every lie Clark told, every secret he kept, deepened Lex's internal struggle. It's heartbreaking because, as viewers, we see how a little more honesty might have saved them both. But in the world of Smallville, fate had other plans. Lex and Clark's friendship was more than just a storyline, it was a ticking time bomb. And when it finally exploded, it didn't just create Superman's greatest enemy. It destroyed the last piece of Lex's humanity.
A chance for him to have a son he can truly love.
What have you?
If there's one person who poured gasoline on the slow-burning fire inside Lex, it's Lionel Luthor. Lionel was a master manipulator who seemed almost determined to crush any goodness left in his son. Throughout Smallville, Lionel's influence looms large over Lex's choices, shaping him into the man he ultimately becomes. From a young age, Lionel set impossibly high expectations for Lex, making it clear that love and approval were things to be earned, not freely given. Every compliment came with a sharp edge. Every moment of pride felt conditional. And if Lex ever stumbled, Lionel was right there to twist the knife. He saw vulnerability in his son as weakness, and instead of nurturing Lex's potential, he exploited it. He weaponized Lex's insecurities, subtly grooming him to adopt a worldview where power and control were the only currencies that mattered. Lionel's manipulations went even deeper. He played mind games that blurred the lines between love and cruelty. One moment he'd act like a supportive father, and the next, he'd sabotage Lex's ambitions just to teach him a brutal life lesson. This constant emotional whiplash left Lex perpetually off balance, never sure if he was a beloved son or just another pawn in Lionel's ruthless game of corporate chess. But here's the genius of Smallville's storytelling. It shows us that Lex's hunger for power wasn't born solely from ambition. It was born from survival. Under Lionel's oppressive shadow, Lex learned that to protect himself, he had to become even more cunning than his father. He wasn't chasing power for the thrill of dominance. He was chasing it because it felt like his only defense against vulnerability and betrayal. And the more Lex tried to break free from Lionel's control, the more entangled he became in his father's web. Lionel's manipulations shaped his very identity. Lex's distrust of others, his obsession with uncovering secrets, especially Clark's, and even his eventual embrace of villainy, all traced back to the psychological warfare Lionel waged on him from the start. What makes this dynamic even more heartbreaking is that, deep down, a part of Lex still craved his father's approval. No matter how much power he gained or how fiercely he tried to surpass Lionel, that inner child never stopped yearning for his father to finally say, "I'm proud of you." But of course, that moment never truly came. In the end, Lionel was the architect of Lex's downfall. Their toxic relationship is a masterclass in how a parent's influence can either nurture greatness or, in this case, twist potential into tragedy. Lionel didn't just raise a son, he created a rival. And in doing so, he set Lex Luthor on the irreversible path to darkness. Now, this is where it all unravels. Lex's descent into darkness. What makes Lex's fall so compelling isn't that it happened overnight. It's that it happened in slow, painful steps. Each betrayal, every suspicion, every heartbreak chipped away at the man he could have been, until there was almost nothing left of that hopeful young friend we met in Smallville's early seasons. Let's start with the constant secrecy from Clark. Lex wanted to believe in friendship. He tried to. But the more Clark lied, the more it fed Lex's growing paranoia. He saw patterns in the shadows, felt there was always something just out of reach. Clark's evasions, while understandable to protect his secret, felt like personal betrayals to Lex. And you could see it. Every time Clark dodged a question or hid the truth, Lex's trust fractured a little more. Eventually, Lex wasn't just curious about Clark's secrets. He needed to know. It became an obsession, and that obsession started to define him. Then came the betrayals in love. Lex's romantic life was no refuge, it was a battlefield. Time and time again, the people Lex allowed himself to care for either deceived him, were used against him, or fell victim to his own mistrust. Lana Lang is the perfect example. His relationship with Lana began with genuine affection, maybe even love, but it spiraled into manipulation and control, driven by Lex's desperate fear of losing her. His actions became more extreme, crossing lines he once swore he wouldn't. And deep down, you could feel Lex knew it. He hated himself for it, but he couldn't stop. On top of that, the legacy of the Luthor name weighed heavier than ever. Lex felt cornered, trapped by both destiny and expectation. There's this brilliant moment in Smallville where Lex practically admits that he sees himself as a villain in his own story, but believes it's the only way to survive. He convinces himself that power is the only shield against pain, that if he doesn't take control, someone else will destroy him. In many ways, it's Lex's survival instinct gone horribly wrong. And let's not forget the final straw. The moment Lex fully embraces his dark path, when he discovers the truth about Clark, finally, it's not vindication, it's devastation. Instead of feeling relief, he feels betrayed beyond repair. All those years of half-truths, of reaching out in good faith, only to be shut out, explode into full-blown resentment. In that moment, Lex's fate is sealed. The man who once saw Clark as his greatest hope now sees him as his greatest enemy. Lex's descent into darkness is a slow-motion tragedy. It's the story of a man who could have been saved, who wanted to be saved, but who was pushed and pulled by forces both external and internal, until there was no path left but the one into the shadows. And that's exactly why he remains one of the most unforgettable villains on television. Lex's fall wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. Every part of his journey feels like it was leading him to that dark destiny. And that's what makes his story hit so hard. Lex's core tragedy is that he truly believed he could rise above his circumstances. He wanted to be better. He wanted to prove he was more than Lionel's son, more than the product of pain and betrayal. But the world around him, filled with lies, manipulation, and constant disappointment, kept reinforcing one grim lesson: power is the only thing you can trust. Over time, Lex stopped trying to be the hero of his own story, and instead embraced the role the world seemed to have written for him. What makes this even more heartbreaking is that we, as the audience, see those moments when Lex could have chosen another path. There were windows, brief, shining moments where you think, maybe this is it. Maybe Lex will turn things around. His early friendship with Clark, his initial desire to do good with Luthor Corp, even his genuine attempts at love. But every time, fate or his own fear closed those doors. And let's not forget, Lex didn't become evil just out of spite. He genuinely believed he was doing what had to be done. He saw himself as the only one willing to make the hard choices, the only one with the strength to wield power for the greater good. In his mind, heroes like Clark were too naive, too hesitant. Lex saw the world in shades of gray, and he believed that, to protect it, you had to be willing to get your hands dirty. That's the brilliance of Smallville's portrayal. Lex's descent isn't cartoonish villainy, it's deeply human. He becomes a villain not because he was born evil, but because every part of his life nudged him, shoved him, and finally hurled him toward that role. And once he accepted it, there was no turning back. By the end, Lex is both terrifying and tragic. He's the villain you fear, but also the one you mourn. His brilliance, his ambition, his deep longing for connection, all twisted into weapons of destruction. And even as he stands as Superman's greatest enemy, you can't help but wonder, if just a few things had been different, could Lex have been the world's greatest hero instead? And that's a wrap on Lex Luthor's tragic journey. His descent into darkness is one of TV's most unforgettable stories, proof that sometimes the line between hero and villain is thinner than we think. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into iconic characters. And hey, what's your take on Lex? Drop your thoughts below.